Hello and welcome to Books and Beyond. My name is Jimmy Bennet. I'm your host, and Books and Beyond is the show where we help people personify their aspirations. We have a really nice show today. I got an old friend on, but before I introduce her, I would like to talk about the Southeastern Connecticut uh, Authors and Publishers Association, CAPA. We meet the third Thursday of every month, usually at the Groton Public Library at 6:30 on Mondays, but the third Monday of every month. But right now, next couple months might be a little dicey. We have Juneteenth holiday, so the library's closed. But we'll be meeting at the Waterford Public Library Monday the 19th of this month. And I encourage everybody from Kappa and anybody else who's interested to come to this meeting. It should be pretty interesting. Larry Zaccaro, one of our members who has just written a screenplay, is going to be doing a presentation on how to convert your book into a screenplay, which is, pretty much a dream of everybody. He's on his way right now, but he's got a lot of great ideas and he'll be able to show you how to get started and how to work that, it was really pretty interesting. So I'm looking forward to that. Also, Kappa will have a booth at the Norwich Rose Arts Festival on July 1st. I hope everybody comes down, check us out. The authors will be taking turns, a couple hour increments at a time, displaying our books and talking about our books and selling our books. So please come down and check us out then. But that's enough of that. I want to get to my guest, Harriet Grayson.
Hello. I'm so happy to be here. Jimmy and I go back mucho years.
Yep.
And we go back a long time, I think, actually, because of Kappa. Yep. I've been a long time member, and I know you have been as well. And so it's wonderful that despite all kinds of changes, the organization continues. It's a wonderful organization, especially useful for people who are sort of getting into writing. They need a little inspiration. We have experienced authors who can talk about the kinds of difficulties one has even writing the book, and then of course the rest of it is publishing it and marketing it. And we usually have some very interesting guests that can help you along. So I encourage you to come on. And I also I will also be at that Rose Festival in Norwich come July 1st. So there's an opportunity. If you like this face, you can see me later in July. That should be a fun experience. And we know that the Norwich, we want to give them our shout out because it's an old town that's had a lot of wonderful history, and it's an opportunity for us as writers and other organizations that will be out at the Rose Festival to give a shout out to Norwich and its Chamber of Commerce. So that's great. A little bit about me, because let's face it, authors are egotists. I took COVID and I used it as an opportunity to really write. I stuck in my house. I do love my house. And I said to myself, what is going on? And the first thing that came to my mind was, I have lived through this before. I'm a child of the 60s, even though I look really nice with my makeup on. And I have, I've seen it all. I mean, the war in Vietnam, all the rioting and the protesting, and all the things that went on in the 60s. So when COVID hits, I said, whoa, wait a minute. I have been here before. And the result of that is I wrote a book called Rockaway Riptides, which actually is a kind of fictionalized memoir growing up in the 1960s in this coastal community called the Rockaways. And it's all about what it's like to be a kid in high school and to be surrounded by the Vietnam War, the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and that just blew us all away. And the book actually starts out with a look at, and a true story, was one of our classmates who had graduated the year before, came home in a body bag from Vietnam, one of the very first casualties of the war. So that sort of frames the story, but it's lots of fun. And when you're a teenager like that, I was 16, 17, you think you're going to live forever anyway. And then so I did that book, and I tried to reach out to people who had gone to school with me, and they became the kind of people who were buying my books. My brilliant brother said, there's a website for Far Rockaway High School graduates, And anyway, he got me the website, and I started to send out just emails to people. And lo and behold, that became the center of that particular universe. And then again, I'm still stuck with COVID. It's, we're there for years. And again, I start to think back, well, wait a minute, what else do I really know about? And that got me to this book, which is Accidental Gangster, Dutch Schultz and Me. And the handsome fellow on the cover is actually my grandfather. And he was a fisherman who was coerced by Dutch Schultz to use his boat to run booze from Canada to the United States. And so there's my grandfather Goldie, and I dedicate the book to him. And his was an interesting life. He's the accidental gangster because he had no interest at any point in time of actually being a gangster and running booze. But in fact, when someone like a Dutch Schultz invites you to join his organization, unless you want to go home to your loved ones in a body bag, you say yes.
You say yes.
You say yes. Definitely, you say yes. So that was the genesis of that book, and it's been relatively popular because we as Americans have this incredible love affair with gangsters. And when this book starts out, my grandfather's a man in his 40s with 5 children, and Dutch Schultz is 19 years old. And thus begins a 13-year relationship for the years of Prohibition of bringing Canadian booze from the Brofman family, who still exist today as being in the booze business, to the international line where my grandfather would go and collect it. He'd then dock the boat yards. You can't get the boat too close to the shore. And Dutch Schultz would bring trucks and rowboats, and we'd go ahead and transport the booze. They take it in the trucks and take it to the 1,000 speakeasies that were in the area. And we're talking about like the New York City area. And there you see the fishing boats, the cars, and of course my handsome grandfather, who's, we never called him by any other name than Goldie. Now the genesis of that nickname is because he had that, you can kind of see it in the photograph, beautiful golden locks. And so his mother called him that, and everybody else continued to call him that. Now my grandfather and Dutch Schultz had one thing in common, and that is they were both American born, which is unusual during the 1920s. They both were Americans. My grandfather came from Jersey City, and Dutch Schultz came from the Bronx. And somehow, needing to find the transportation mode, they chose the boats. And the other kind of interesting stuff I have in there is that during the winter, if anybody knows anything about boating, the weather makes the boats get really choppy, and it can be extremely dangerous. So they actually did need a land route. And one of the things that was made possible through a cousin who had fought in the Great War, we're talking about World War I, was a possibility of linking up with Native Americans, because a number of tribes to this day have reservations that cross Canada and the United States, so that they use those reservations to take the legal booze into Canada in the reservation and then transport it into trucks and drive them to the United States. And that's part of the story. Also, I did a lot of research. I did a lot of research in terms of who this Dutch Schultz was and actually what the 20s were all about. And it's not actually in the book, but it was my grandfather's feeling was that Prohibition was a bunch of white Christian Protestant women who wanted to put their thumbs down on immigrants. And because it was mostly Catholics and Jews who used liquor for ceremonies, and so these white women wanted to crush the immigrant culture. And that was I don't put it in the book, but that was my grandfather's feelings, and it was shared by a lot of other people. The guys who ran booze were, for the most part, really poor fellas. I mean, they came from, just scraping by. And literally, you see pictures of it sometimes, the Lower East Side in the turn of the century, thousands and thousands of people huddled together in these disgusting little tenements. And this was an opportunity to make money. I mean, Prohibition was a terrible, terrible idea, and it then gave rise to really organized crime, which exists to this world today. The players might be different, what they're selling might be different, but they're around, and they learn these things because of Prohibition. And so it was it was a really stupid idea. And eventually in 1932, President Roosevelt, running on for election, he made part of his platform that he would end prohibition. Of course, Roosevelt is elected and prohibition ends. So 1933 is the end of prohibition. Now, all these bad boys in the booze business also had some kind of sideline. So Dutch Schultz was in the numbers racket, but other guys were in the shakeout rackets. There were guys in the casino business, illegal at this point in time. There are people in the, like Lucky Luciano is in the prostitution and heroin markets. So come 1933, this becomes a much bigger deal for many of these guys. And I talk about, in the book, about these guys and what happens to them after Prohibition. And some of them land up in jail, some of them land up dead, and many of them don't go to prison for horrible murders. They go to prison like Al Capone for tax evasion. And that's how they came after Dutch Schultz. They came after him for this very same thing. He had 2 trials, which I talk about in the book, because my grandfather, I guess you would consider it illegal, but at any rate, he was involved in trying to placate the jurors. Unlike today, who they were was actually quite well known. So you knew exactly who was sitting on a jury, and my grandfather went away trying to get them to see Dutch Schultz's side of the issue. And they had 2 trials, one in Syracuse, New York, which was a hung jury, and the second one was in Malone, New York, a little town in the middle of nothing, which was actually, you would think, would be very much against these gangsters. But in fact, Prohibition had been very good for these guys. They were really dirt poor, and the fact that trucks were going back and forth between Canada and the United States gave them an opportunity to make some money. So that trial, he was actually acquitted, Dutch Schultz. And then, like many gangsters, he came to an unhappy end. And that was then when he was finished in life itself, my grandfather was then free to pursue what he wanted to. And he went back to his boats. That's what he knew, and that's what he went back to. And it isn't until, it's not in the book actually, but come 1940, the United States government starts this Lend-Lease program with Britain and the Soviet Union building stuff. And my grandfather becomes part of the Americans at building aircraft for the Allies in Old Bethpage, the Grumman Aircraft Factory, which Grumman is still around, I think, but I don't know if they're building planes for the U.S. Army. So that was the end of basically my grandfather's working life. So it was fun, and I picked up pieces from my mother. She had all these stories to tell. I'm sorry that she didn't live long enough to actually see this book published, because she would have, I think, enjoyed it immensely. And I got stories from my father. He used to talk about his father-in-law. And other members of the family used to talk about Goldie and my grandmother. And so I incorporated that. And the still mystery is, supposedly, that Dutch Schultz buried $7 million in a safe, and he buried it in the Catskill Mountains. The government has been looking for it. Gangsters were looking for it. And for quite a while, people were following my grandfather because they were thinking that he knew exactly where the stuff was buried. Well, if he knew, he didn't tell anybody, and I doubt if he did tell anyone. And Dutch Schultz supposedly actually murdered the Bo Weinberg, the man who helped him bury the treasure. So,
Wow.
Anyway, that's me.
You know, I'd just like to add on to this a little bit. Number one, I think it's really fascinating, that you have this piece of history from your family. And it's something I've always encouraged people to do. Your family, your grandparents, your parents, they are full of all kinds of history and stories and stuff like that. And you just need to sometimes just ask them, try to get it out of them.
Right.
But along with your story, it's kind of coincidental. But as you say, your grandfather used to bring the booze from Canada down to the United States. Well, my great-grandfather and my grandfather were the guys who used to take the booze off the beach, and they would take it to a location like a barn or a storage shed somewhere, and they would transport it there and hide it there until the trucks from New York came out
Right.
and picked the booze up and took it into New York. So they didn't actually, though my grandfather was a fisherman, they didn't use their boats, but they grew up on the South Fork of Long Island. Our family was spread out there. They knew all of the locations, all the places where they could drop the booze and stuff like that. And they knew how to, they knew where they could store it. And they actually, at one point, on a raid, the government raided them. They got away, but then they ended up getting caught. In the end, somebody ratted them out. But they ended up, the trial, they were being prosecuted for, booze running. But, the smart New York lawyers, the trial was in New York, and they were out on the east end of Long Island, way out at the tip.
Right.
And they kept postponing the trial.
Oh.
So after a few times, the witnesses were like, "Hey, I'm not going back to New York," because back then it wasn't just a 2-hour car ride. You know what I
Right.
mean? It was a half-day travel or a day travel. And they said, "You know what? I'm not doing this again." So they ended up dropping the charges. It's the only reason why they didn't end up spending time in jail. But my grandfather has often told me that that's what gave him his good start in life. He bought his first car when he was a kid. He was only 16. He bought his first car with that, and he bought a boat and some equipment, and began his life as a bayman out on Long Island. And it's incredible. I don't think people realize the scope of really. I suppose you could almost compare it to like the marijuana of these days, where people, were smuggling the marijuana, of course, selling marijuana on the side, blah, 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 blah. But not on such a big scale. I mean, it was everybody. It was...
Oh, it was millions and millions of dollars.
And it turned almost every law-abiding citizen in this country into a criminal at one point or another, whether they were drinking the booze or going to a speakeasy or having something to do with it, And you're right, it was incredible. It was an incredibly stupid law.
Yes.
Impossible to enforce. And all it did was lead to a huge, like you say, organized crime and a huge shift in the criminal paradigms of this country.
Right.
You think about the scope of it now, and you think, what the hell were you thinking? How could they come about doing this? But I think the important part is, I love the fact that, this is your grandfather. You know what I mean? You have that good inside information. It's not just somebody reading a dusty record somewhere. And that's the kind of thing I think it's important. I'm looking forward to reading it myself. Because I can sort of. I wish I knew more about how my grandfather. I mean, they mentioned in passing, but I wish I had really, got the details from them and stuff. I don't know what organization they worked for or who they were.
Well, my mother.
Maybe my grandfather actually took the booze off of your grandfather's boat.
Boats.
My great grandfather, huh? So, isn't that funny?
Yeah, it's possible. Now, my mother's siblings were a few years apart, so they sometimes had slightly different ideas and stories. But so one of my aunts would run walk down the street and said, "Oh, my papa works for Dutch Schultz," and everyone on the block stayed away. They were afraid because his name was Notorious Thug.
Yeah, he was. Yeah.
So they stayed away from that. And then the other kind of interesting, and these are the stories that my mother remembers the best. So my grandmother had a parrot named Polly. Now, Polly was actually a boy, and Polly was very verbal. And so my mother remembers that her youngest sister would run in the street, and the bird would yell, "Gladys, get out of the street, get out of the street." And then, of course, when my grandfather came home, the parrot would say, "Papa home, Papa home." So those are the stories my mother remembers the best.
Right.
She remembers the big German Shepherd Ruby. She remembers all the cats. My grandfather kept cats because he had boats and they keep the rats away.
Right.
I mean, that's seriously why he kept the cats. But the kids loved the cats, so they took them home. They didn't always leave them on the boat. So those, there's a whole bunch of other family kind of stories that I was able to weave into it. And a very important part of the book and about the story itself was that the police came after my grandfather he was warned, and he left this country, went back to Europe, and he went to Białystok, Poland, which is where his family was originally from. My grandfather was born in this country, but he knew where all his family came from, and he went back there to hide from the American police. And he then tried, without very much success. He could see, not necessarily the rise of Hitler, but he could see that there was so much unrest, and he now lived in America, and there was so much opportunity versus living in these miserable little towns in Poland, to convince some of the relatives to come to the United States. And since my grandfather was an expert at smuggling, what was the big deal about smuggling humans? He was very unsuccessful, but a few cousins were able to come, and my grandfather was a smart man. He knew that the government would come after him for unpaid taxes, so he created a whole bunch of businesses, and he had relatives in these businesses as a way to launder the money.
Oh, wow.
And what happened, unfortunately, was most of these businesses were crushed by the Great Depression. You know,
Right.
After Prohibition is gone, 1933, you're still in the middle of the Depression, and so he always kept the boats, he always kept a bait station, and he had, like, as far as my mother was like one big business that he kept was a hardware business. So that was it. He had a whole bunch of other things, but the Great Depression was tough on all kinds of business people.
That was a point my great-grandfather made, or my grandfather made to me too. He said that, I asked him one time about the Depression, and my family were simple fishermen and, people out on Long Island, but the money that he made running booze and stuff is what, he was well off. I mean, when people started losing everything, and one time funny story, one time I said to him, we were looking at these beautiful mansions in East Hampton on the beach and on the dunes and stuff, and I said, wow, Pop, it would be nice to live in a place like that, huh? And he said, oh, I could have bought any one of those when I was a kid, because the Depression came.
Right, dirt cheap.
Everybody lost everything. They were sitting there empty. He goes, but as he said, only a damn fool builds a house on the ocean. Because, eventually it's going to go.
It's going to sink, right, or blow away.
But I was like, wow. I mean, you really think about it, and it was really quite fortunate for my family. It's what kept my grandfather, afloat. He could, of course, being a fisherman, people always have to eat. But,
right.
Right. But he was, compared to a lot of people, he was well off for running the booze and stuff. And you think about it, I don't know, it's kind of funny now. It's you don't think about it in the same, I don't think about him as being like a criminal. I just sort of thinking about him being smart. When again, if you saw somebody dealing drugs today, you're like, you're a drug dealer.
Mm-hmm.
You're not smart, you're a drug dealer, but it's,
well, part of
semantics, you know what I mean?
Well, part of it has to do with Prohibition was against something that everybody did.
Right.
Everybody drank. And if you were in my grandfather's world, he just thought that this was just a big push against immigrants, of which
right.
his family were immigrants. So it was something that people just did. They did it all the time. And to prohibit it was a really crazy stuff. It's a little different than marijuana, only because not everybody smokes marijuana.
Right, yeah.
Everybody
drinks.
I know
there is a difference. But yeah.
The whole idea of organized crime and how to organize comes from Prohibition. Right. They just adapted it for whatever else they're going on.
Well, we could go on forever, but look, let's. We got a few minutes left. I want to talk about the newest literary salon. Tell us about that.
Yes. So for many years, and Jimmy knows this, I was running a literary salon I tried it in Westerly, Rhode Island. That's where I am from. And also we tried a little bit in Waterford, Connecticut. So we're going to try it again. Now the people that supported me in Westerly have unfortunately gone. So we now have the same site, if anybody knows where the Malted Barley is, in downtown Westerly. It's now called Pooch's Poorhouse. Cute name, right? And they have offered to give us their upstairs room, beautiful room upstairs. And I want everybody who is a writer or someone who loves books, book lovers and book writers. I'm inviting you all to come for the first batch of 2023 Literary Salon, Pooch's Poorhouse, on Sunday, August 13th from 5 to 7 p.m. If you want more information, you can contact me at graysonharriet@gmail.com, and I'll give you more information. I really want people to come out. I want to show support for local writers, because it's local readers who support local writers who make it possible for us to actually be out there, selling our books and to encourage people to read and to write. So come on out. I really want you to be with us on August 13th, 5 to 7 p.m. If you haven't been in downtown Westerly in a long time, it's really quite beautiful. Pooch's Poorhouse is like in the middle of the block, so it's really easy to find. There is now lots more parking than there ever was before, so there's no excuse why you can't come down. It's a wonderful town. It's a wonderful idea, and listen, we are local writers, and we need local readers, so that's my plug.
And you know what? I hope I want to be there on the 13th, your first one, and I encourage the same thing. I encourage people to come in. Let's look. There's a lot of really great talent. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of really great local talent, and you're not. John Grisham or Stephen King ain't going to show up and sign your book for you. So this is a way where I think people really, you don't understand. I want you to understand how you can come and see and actually talk to the people who wrote the book, get their thought process on how things go and reasons why they did it and stuff. It makes it so much more personal and so much more interesting for you.
Right. When you autograph the books, we'd love to do that.
You autograph that book right
Absolutely.
there for you. It's your book.
Yep.
And it's something to have. And hey, you never know. Mm-hmm. You never know.
Yes.
And your great-great-grandson may one day say, I have a signed copy of, so
yes.
You really should check it out.
And they have there's still plenty of wonderful beer in this place, even though it's not the malted barley anymore. There's lovely, lovely beer, and then they actually have a menu in food. The malted barley was famous for this incredible pretzels. But listen, this place is going to give it a try. You'll have a lot more varied menu. So come on out and support us, all of us, local writers.
Local writers.
That's us.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today on Books and Beyond. Thank you, Harriet, for coming on. It was a great show. We'll see you next time. And please, the 13th at Pooch's Poorhouse.
5 to 7 p.m.
5 to 7.
You betcha.
Sunday night. See you there. Take care.